So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
It's interesting when you ride motorcycles because guys will come up to you and they'll say the dumbest shit when you're on your bike.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, May the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, effective interpersonal communications, rules for retrogrades, the sovereign child, motivation, meditation, and rules for patriots. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Nothing is more deadly to achievement than the belief that effort will not be rewarded, that the world is a bleak and discriminatory place in which only the predatory and the specially preferred can get ahead. George Gilder. How cronyism can destroy the human spirit and create extreme cynicism is perhaps its worst component. Human action is a powerful force, and human inaction equally so. When one believes the game is rigged, inactivity results. Cronyism strikes at the incentives of free enterprise and robs the would-be economic actor of aspiration. In this sense, cronyism joins collectivism as the primary enemy of a free and virtuous society.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, from Effective Interpersonal Communication, Method 11, Sweet Sandwich, also known as Veiled Criticism. Sweet Sandwich is based on countering one of the fundamental flaws of human psychology. All flattery is truth, all criticism is lies. So if you want to criticize someone, but at the same time you don't want to hurt their feelings, it's very difficult. You're adopting two contradictory policies simultaneously. If you criticize them, they'll refuse to accept their fault and instead start hating you. And if you don't criticize them, they'll continue with their mean behavior and act like they're doing nothing wrong. One way around this is the sweet sandwich method. In this method, you first praise the person, then tell them the criticism as politely as possible, then praise them again. This way, the bitter criticism gets sandwiched between two sweet slices of praise, hence the method's name. Mon is a gardener. One day his employer, Saqib, complains to him that he doesn't brush away the leaves and foliage from the garden properly. One way of doing this will be to scold him or say directly, Mon, you don't brush away the leaves and foliage properly. This will make Mon feel bad that he doesn't do his job properly, but due to the human nature discussed above, all flattery is truth, all criticism is lies, Mon will not want to take the blame. Instead, he will start to dislike his employer. However, Saqib chooses a different way to complain. Moen, you trim the plants very nicely. I'm really happy with you. However, the leaves and foliage were not brushed away properly. I know you work really hard, but I would be really grateful if you could pay a little extra attention to the cleaning. Saqib first finds something to praise Mon for. It's easier to praise someone than we think, but it should be something which is true, or you might regret it later when Moen doesn't trim your plants to your liking. Next, Saqib lays out the compliment, again as politely, or complaint, again as politely as possible. Lastly, Saqib praises Mon for being hard-working. This way, Mon not only doesn't mind, but he now works harder. Not only does he do the cleaning better, but he also tries to pay extra attention to trimming the plants nicely because he is motivated by the unexpected praise. Also, he secretly fears his employer might take back his praise if the plants are not trimmed to the employer's liking next time. The sweet sandwich method has two advantages. One, you avoid getting into a fight because by not being blunt in criticism and sandwiching it instead in two loaves of sweet bread, this method minimizes the risk of hurting the other person's feelings. Two, it saves your time. No, not by saving you from a fight, although that's one way it saves you time too, but by saving the minutes, hours, days, or if you really loved that person, years you would have spent procrastinating on your words or actions and blaming yourself for hurting the other person's feelings. Newton's third law of motion, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, is as notoriously true for human emotions as it is for physical entities. When we hurt someone, whether by words or by action, we don't only hurt them, we hurt ourselves as well. It's just that it takes a little while to realize that. By then, things have gotten messy, and we need to clear the mess we created. And it's always easier to create a mess than to clean it. We all like praise and hate criticism. We should keep in mind all others are the same, even if it matters more or less to different people. It still matters nevertheless. After all, as humans, we all have emotions. None of us is a robot. However, it should be noted that being polite here doesn't mean you criticize someone in an indirect, ambiguous way. This will only serve to confuse them. Instead, you have to be perfectly clear about what you are saying. For example, if one of your friends enters your home and walks over your carpet with her shoes on, you shouldn't say something like, "I like cultured people so much. They take care of putting everything in the right place, whether it be their clothes or their shoes." Either your friend won't understand what you are talking about at all, or if she does understand that the reference is to herself, she will take it as a taunt. She might either choose to ignore what you said and keep wearing her shoes while feeling angry at you for insulting her, or if she does choose to take off her shoes, she will still feel hurt at having been taunted. So, you have to tell the criticism directly. You have to tell her that it is she and not someone else who needs to take off her shoes when she walks over your carpet. Now, this method relies on two praises before and after the criticism to dilute the effect of the criticism. There's a potential for the method to not always work properly, however. And let us examine the reasons this can happen, how we can strive to make the method more foolproof. Some people fail to register the praises and only feel the criticism. Other people completely fail to register the criticism and only lap up the praise and think that you are actually very happy with their behavior and continue with their undesirable conduct as if you never criticized them. This method is more useful to resolve personal differences as compared to public debates because in a public debate, your opponent usually has the intention of winning and proving himself right in front of the public, not learning the truth. The method works on most healthy-minded individuals. Because criticism has a stronger effect on the human brain, it's necessary to praise the other person twice as much as you criticize them. And so that was method 11, the sweet sandwich, and it's wrong. The whole thing is just wrong because it assumes that everybody is like a spoiled brat, a spoiled child, that if you go to them and you tell them, hey, you're not doing this right, this is what you need to do, and correct them, that they will then fall apart. They'll have a stroke or a heart attack, or they will fall into some kind of a depression, that they're fragile, that all people are emotionally and psychologically fragile. And it's baloney. The other thing that they're forgetting in this chapter is property. The gardener in the first example, you're the person that owns the property. You're hiring this man and paying him to do this job. He's not doing it pro bono. Okay, if he was doing it as a volunteer, then maybe you want to say be very more guarded or cautious about the way you criticize because you don't want to discourage the person from coming back next time. But as an employee, if you're paying this person, you expect them to do the job and do it right the first time. Okay, now it doesn't make any sense to be harsh about it. True. But simply going to them and saying, excuse me, you're supposed to do this, but you didn't do it. Please make sure you get that done. And that's it. I don't need to give him praise in the front and praise in the back. I give him the direct criticism, tell him what it is that I don't like. Since he's being paid, I don't care what his psychological state is. He's being paid. It's a quid pro quo. He gets the money, I get the service, and that's the way it works. And if he becomes fragile or something, I can simply fire him and hire somebody else in his place. And he knows that, by the way. So when I go to him and I say, you're not doing the job correctly, as long as I'm being honest with him, I'm not just being nitpicky, but assuming that I'm being honest, then he will know, well, if I want to keep this job, I better start doing it right. And we all know when we've done things wrong. When we go to work and we cut a corner, we do something halfway, we're lethargic, we're supposed to get something done by the end of the day and it takes us a day and a half to get it done. We know that we're not doing our job. We know we're not doing it to the best of our ability. We know we're not meeting the boss's expectations. So what a surprise when the boss comes to us and says, hey, you're not doing the job. I'm not going to fall apart behind that, and neither is anyone else. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 31. Don't allow radicals to personalize the general. When I was in graduate school, I served as a teaching assistant for an undergraduate moral theology class taught by a kind and erudite bishop. The good bishop was always brimming with interesting stories from his time in ministry, and one day he related an experience that has always stuck with me, as it was particularly poignant. The bishop, striving to be a good shepherd in his diocese, had agreed to teach a lesson at a local Catholic secondary school. As part of his lesson, he was outlining the church's teachings on life and the dignity of the human person. After he explained to the class the church's teaching that in vitro fertilization is morally illicit, since it separates the unitive and procreative aspects of conjugality and reduces the body to a mere mechanism for procreation, he saw a girl's hand shoot up. The bishop called on the girl, expecting a good faith question aimed at clarifying some point of doctrine that he had glossed over or had explained unsatisfactorily in his haste to deliver his lesson. What he got was a definite gotcha challenge, one aimed at making him look harsh and judgmental.
My mom had me through in vitro fertilization,
the girl blustered.
Are you saying that I'm not as much a person as anyone else?
Such is the method of radicals. Expect no decency from them. Since they cannot compete in the realm of abstract ideas and logic, radicals have adopted an aggressive method for putting retrograde interlocutors on the defensive. They manufacture an insult out of thin air by taking the general, impersonal concept being advocated by the retrograde and apply it to a sensitive real-world situation to make it seem as if the retrograde is attacking the actor or the result of the action, in the case of a child conceived through in vitro fertilization, instead of the action itself. Retrogrades must be ready for this sort of cunning if they are to prevail in public dialogue and rally followers to their cause. The radicals' method of personalizing the general is effective for three reasons. First, it distracts the retrograde and the audience, if done in a public debate, from the retrograde's thread of thought. Second, it steals the initiative from the retrograde, putting him on the defensive and making him feel as if he must reassure the radical that he bears him no personal animus. Third, it manipulates the audience, making them feel sympathetic to the radical's untenable belief out of pity for his condition. Since the method of personalizing the general is so endemic in radical dialogue, we must learn to negate its efficacy. With but a little forethought, this is not a difficult thing to do. One of the best ways to handle personalization of a topic is to simply depersonalize it, meeting the radicals +1 with our own -1, therefore arriving at a means of 0, back where we began. If the retrograde argues, for example, that abortion is evil, and is met with the standoffish rejoinder that the radical's mom had an abortion, are you calling her evil? The retrograde should simply pivot, saying something to the effect of, I've never met your mother and she's totally irrelevant to this debate. Whether or not she's had an abortion has no bearing on whether murdering a baby in utero is evil, so let's stick to material points. By saying something to this effect, the retrograde points out the illogic of talking about the radical's mother during a policy debate. He also straightens the kink that the radical has attempted to throw into the otherwise straightforward subject matter by explicitly denouncing the attempt to hijack the conversation with irrelevant facts. By scolding the radical in this manner, the retrograde also subtly scolds every member of an audience who is tempted to be spun off by the radical's red herring. Further, by reasserting his point that abortion is evil in his rebuke of the radical's attempt to personalize the conversation, the retrograde organically places the debate back on track, recalling it to its original subject matter. Another effective technique for subverting radicals' attempts to personalize a given topic is to couch assertions in higher authority. For example, when meeting the challenge, "My mother had an abortion, are you calling her evil?" it is salutary to reply, "What I think is neither here nor there. What matters is what the church teaches about abortion, that it's murder. Radicals are more circumspect to attack powerful collectives than they are to attack individuals. It would be politically disastrous to insult billions of Christians worldwide by publicly denigrating the church. As such, by joining one's opinions to the doctrines of a powerful institution, the retrograde gives himself some measure of insulation from radical petulance. Also, if retrograde views are seen as mainstream, in that they fall within the penumbra of a respected organization's beliefs, then people will be loath to label the retrograde as cruel and judgmental, because in so doing, they'd be besmirching friends, family, and neighbors who may also be affiliated with the organization. Whatever method one chooses for circumventing radicals' attempts at personalizing, the central concept remains the same. We must learn to distinguish the condemnation of the sin from the condemnation of the sinner. We must learn to distinguish the attack on an idea from an attack on a person. Whatever the retrograde does, he must avoid seeming worried about looking mean or uncaring in response to the radicals' attempt to take personal umbrage from a general idea. As spineless and unprincipled as they are, mod cons habitually fall into this trap, and they never seem to learn to avoid it from the failures of the past. As soon as radicals see weakness and waffling in response to their personalization and crocodile tears, they will press their perceived advantage ad infinitum. Sensing blood in the water and a fearful, disoriented prey, they will continue to ramp up their aggression till eventually they corner and devour it. Never be afraid to tell a radical how few hoots you give about a particular action done by his mother, one way or another. Once radicals know how unafraid you are of appearing mean and how indifferent you are to their sordid personal lives, they'll reverse course, opting for some other cheap trick to try and win the day.
And that was Rule 31 for Rules for Retrogrades. We used to see this tactic back when I was going to schools. Every once in a while you'd have some student that would pull this stunt. And basically it has nothing to do with vitro, metro, gaditro. What it has to do with is power. That this is a student that's standing up and trying to run the classroom, telling and daring the bishop to reprimand her in front of all of the students. And the way we usually had teachers handle this was one of two ways. Usually they'll say, we'll talk about this after class. Then the student would get reprimanded in private when all the other students had gone on to their next class. Or the teacher would simply say, go to the principal's office now. And that'd be the end of that. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we're going on to this book by Aaron Stupple called The Sovereign Child, which just the title of the book is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, but this is the left talking to itself. This is the left giving its rank and file instructions. And that's why it's so important to read this book so that you understand that when you see kids out misbehaving, it's deliberate. It's not because their parents are negligent. You might often hear the excuse from somebody, usually politicians, but the parents are overworked, blah, blah, blah. No, it isn't. It's because the parents use this book as a guide, and the theme of this whole book is let your children do whatever they want. So we're going to be continuing on with the chapter 2 about getting up when they want. And this is the section called, What About Putting Toddlers on a Schedule? Even before school and daycare age, it is common for parents to put toddlers and babies on a schedule, which means structuring predictable times for naps, eating, and play. A reliable nap time or bedtime is certainly helpful for a caregiver who has other things they want to do. However, the above arguments against schedules apply to toddlers and babies as well. First, scheduling can backfire, especially with toddlers. Ironically, trying to get them to sleep at certain times so that a parent can structure their day around them puts severe limits on what parents can do. Nap times become a kind of fulcrum for the day, with a lot of anxiety centered on whether the parent can get the kid down. If successful, quiet must be maintained to sustain the nap for the allotted time. Even in the best circumstances, this adds rigidity to things like hosting guests or accommodating spontaneity, since everyone is required to literally tiptoe around nap time. Worse, when putting a kid to sleep doesn't work, parents waste hours trying to succeed, using up the free time that the nap was supposed to generate for the parent in the first place. If the child's resistance to nap time devolves into full-blown conflict, then the child tends to become even more restless than before. We discovered early on with our first child that spending hours trying to get her to sleep at opportune times rarely worked out. It was much more efficient to simply go about our day and figure out how to accommodate her if and when she fell asleep. This relieved us of the burden of trying to manage her, eliminated any conflict about getting her to go to sleep, and allowed her to develop her own sense of when she was tired and needed a rest. What about small children who want to stay up and keep everyone else awake? When toddlers stay up late, they still want to be entertained, and this is a problem for parents and siblings who want to sleep. It is hard to address this form from afar because kids vary greatly in their preferred means of entertainment. In general, parents are not obligated to entertain their kids at all times. Just because kids have free reign doesn't mean parents are their slaves. When I feel like going to sleep, I tell my kids I'm tired, I don't feel like playing with them anymore. Then, just like adults, my kids find ways to entertain themselves with technology like iPads until they're ready for bed, according to their own preferences. When I make staying up less interesting, my kids are less interested in staying up too. After all, they regard me as a trusted source of fun in their lives. Taking your kids seriously gives them reasons to take you seriously as well. And again, it's all hogwash, and we all know that. And but again, this is their attitude. This is the left's attitude. It's not a philosophy. It's not a serious intellectual exposition. It's just attitude. But it's one that is useful for people to know and understand the would-be true conservative so that you can make more sense out of our world. When you see things on the news, again, kids running around, running amok at malls, swarming stores and robbing them blind, or even shootings. The kids, one of the last shootings that happened, a 16-year-old was given a rifle for his birthday. Okay, but the child was allowed to keep it, I guess, in his room. I guess he was allowed to keep it under his bed or whatever. That's ridiculous. You don't do that. If you're going to get the kid a weapon, you lock it up. And you tell him you're only getting access to it when you and I go to the range or go hunting. Okay, that's what you do. But these parents didn't do that. Again, under the idea of the child is sovereign, the child gets to do whatever they want to do, then they get the gun, they get in their room, probably with plenty of ammunition, and then when they decide they want to go to school with it, the parents just shrug their shoulders and let them go. Wrong answer. Absolutely 100% wrong answer. And parents will be disabused of this kind of thing if angry parents go to the parents whose child was shooting up the school, goes to their house, bangs on the door, and demands answers and explanations. And when the parents get sued and or put in prison, then we will have a situation where mass shootings in schools will stop, or at least be reduced. Back in a minute. Thank you. You know what time it is. It's time for motivation.
Many of you, you're tired, or you're afraid, or you're anxious, or you're disappointed, because the very thing that you've hoped for, the very thing that you have fought for, has not happened, and you feel ready to give up in this moment.
It's lonely. You will be laughed at. People will call you crazy. You will be misunderstood.
It's going to get rough. It's going to be very challenging. Whenever you decide that you want to grow, whenever you decide that you want to go to another level, all hell will break loose. That goes with it. That goes with the territory. That when you want to grow, when you want to achieve, when you want to experience more, everything that can happen will happen.
In the middle of all that chaos, you got to remember that it's those low moments that will define who you really are.
The true character of a person is shown when your back is up against the wall. These are the moments that separate the successful from everybody else.
You know what you got to do to get to paradise? You got to fight like fucking hell to get to fucking paradise. Paradise starts in hell. So the ones that can fight, the ones that come back, those are the ones that succeed.
See, whenever you decide you want to go to another level, you've got to fasten your psychological, your mental, and your spiritual seatbelt, because you're going to experience some turbulence when you're going up. And some of you are already experiencing that turbulence. Don't be frightened by that. You've got to go through this phase here. This is how you grow. This is how you develop. See, life is like a roller coaster. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Sometimes things go well, and sometimes they don't go well. But in the down moments, that's when you discover who you are. In this prosperous time, you put it in your pocket. In the lean times, you put it in your heart.
This is necessary for you to get where you want to go. And if you quit, if you falter, if you stop, all the pain will be for nothing.
You cannot get to success without suffering, sweating, sacrificing, staying locked in and fighting your way through tears and trials and tests. But many of you think that greatness goes on sale, but true quality never goes on sale. It costs what it costs, and you gotta pay the price.
There are no discounts to success. Only grind, only perseverance, only sweat, blood, and tears. It ain't no shame in thinking about quit. It ain't no shame in getting tired. But the trick is, don't let that thought become a reality. Say to yourself, I gotta rethink it and get this thought out of my mind. Why? Because the shame is in quit.
And I'm telling you, I know you're in a storm, and I know it hurts, and I know you don't want to take it anymore. The ship is being overthrown with water right now. Your family seems like it's drowning at this moment. Your dreams look like you're seeing them from underwater. Whatever storm you found yourself in today, don't give up. You have not seen the best days of your life yet.
As you step into it, awkward and uncomfortable, as you move toward it, as you keep moving toward it, as you keep believing, keep trusting, keep coming, keep digging, keep going, keep flowing, keep showing up.
Just keep holding on with everything floating around you. Keep holding on to the peace that you got.
See, there's some people in this room right now that you need to hear this loud and clear. You need to get this in your spirit, because I don't know what you're walking through, but some of you right now, you are in a tough season. An event has happened, and something's happened, and maybe you have failed. But I want to remind you that failure is not final, it's formative. It is part of the process. It's part of the journey. Your failure matters as much as your success. How do you think you're going to grow if you don't ever fail? Yet some of you have failed, and you have decided, well, guess what? I'm a failure. No, failure is an event. It is never a person. Failure is actually fuel for your future. The way that you grow, the way that you advance. You have to fail in order to succeed. If you do not give up, if you fight back, you can beat it. I know you have that warrior inside. And now I just need you to activate it. This thing will not beat you. You might be one phone call away. You might be one opportunity away. You might be 1 second away from your entire life blowing up. And you will never ever know if this was your moment, if this was your destiny, if this was your time, if you quit. So don't you ever give up on me. You keep fighting and you keep striving.
I don't care what it is. I don't care how many times you've had to cry yourself to sleep. I don't care how difficult it is. Don't you dare give up now, because whatever is over you defines you, and whatever defines you limits you. You better put some strength in your back, plant your feet, square your shoulders, and stand up to it.
Stand when it's uncertain. Stand when it doesn't feel good. Stand when it's controversial. Stand when it doesn't seem to be happening. Stand on what you know when you can't trust what you see.
Don't you dare sit down. Don't you dare crumble under the weight of it. Don't you dare give in because of the nature of it. Don't you dare go home and raise the white flag of surrender. This is not your season to die.
This is not your season to quit. There's joy, there's peace, there's breakthrough, but you'll never see it if you don't stand up to it.
Download this video in order.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And so far in the podcast, you've been through a lot. You've been through all of these rules and some music and comedy. And now it's time to relax. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the last 6 paragraphs of an article in the American Thinker called Getting Ahead of History. And let's see, one of the most common damage control strategies is to try to get ahead of a negative story. It's pretty simple. Just break the bad news yourself instead of waiting for someone else to do it for you. That way you can shape the accepted narrative by being first. Thinking more long-term, if you want to define the historical record, you have to create a dominant media narrative. Future Americans will consume a historical record defined by repetitive media reports from today, which will be used as a source material for books and documentaries, all to suggest that the Biden administration was 100% to blame for the deception. Journalists want to manipulate the public into thinking they fulfilled their duty as members of the Fourth Estate. This is not healthy for the Republic. Conservatives need to set the record straight for the very same reason the media is working so hard to fictionalize that record. History is at stake. Now is the time for conservatives to make sure the historical record is accurate. Consider this: if the media even now is really interested in the truth, then why are they not asking who actually was in charge when Biden couldn't completely carry out the duties of the office? Their silence on this question says all you need to know about, quote, journalistic integrity, unquote, in 2025. Now, one of the problems here is that one of the interesting things is the insight. I like his insight into this topic about the news media now trying to get ahead of history. They go out and the media acts as a buffer for the Biden administration, willfully and with premeditation. And then after the Biden administration is gone, and now it's a Trump administration, now their integrity is on the line. They need people to listen to them, pay attention to them, because if people don't, then the media can't gaslight them. That's exactly what he's describing here. He says, about break the bad news yourself, and that way you can shape the accepted narrative by being first. In other words, gaslighting people. So the other thing that's interesting, though, is where he makes a big mistake, is that he says that conservatives need to set the record straight for the very same reasons the media is working so hard to fictionalize that record. And no. What needs to happen is the media needs to be punished. That's what needs to happen. There's a pattern here where the left goes out and screws up, and then the right has to wipe their butts. The right has to clean up the messes. Sean Hannity will say, oh, no, don't do this, don't do that, conservatives, because we have to set the example. What the hell do I look like, a Boy Scout? No, I don't have to set any example. The people that screwed up, clean up. The journalists, the so-called journalists that dropped the ball deliberately about the Biden administration and who was in charge deserve to be severely punished for their villainy, because that's exactly what it was, villainous. And that's what this author is missing out on. Punish these people. Not held accountable, that's weak. That's left-wing weasel words. No, they should be punished. Exactly how they should be punished, I guess I'd have to leave up to each individual. I myself, I've been punishing them for a long time. I refuse to listen to them. CNN, MSNBC, and the big three, CBS, NBS, and ABS. So, again, this article would have been much better, much stronger, although he did show a insight, that he had some insights to what was going on here. But it would have been much better, much stronger if he had gone ahead and first of all, explained it as gaslighting, and then demand that the left-wing news media in this country be punished. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, what does the phrase, if you're explaining, you're losing, mean? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. From the perspective of your audience, if you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, if you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, then you continue to expel words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for Patriots.
Chapter 11. Commandment number 10. Play offense. The great Yogi Berra said it best. Half of this game is 90% mental. The inconvenient truth is we conservatives are so used to being marginalized that we're often mentally pistol-whipped before the battle even begins. We are so desperate for cultural acceptance that we'll latch on to even the slightest homage to conservatism from a famous figure, no matter how flawed. In football, it's known as a helmet game. When one team has such a mental stronghold on its rival that the minute things don't go as planned on the field, they start collectively thinking to themselves, here we go again, anticipating the worst. When a team has reached that mental breaking point against its rival, it's time for a culture change. And that starts by hiring leaders or coaches who will challenge the status quo and get the players to believe in themselves again. I think American conservatism is in the exact place my favorite college football team was in back in 1969, when a young coach named Bo Schembechler arrived on the scene from Miami of Ohio. Michigan was built on a winning tradition, just like conservatism, but had fallen behind because the nice guy coach was getting run over by the Buckeye bully, Woody Hayes. The final game Michigan played before Schembechler arrived was against Ohio State for the Big Ten Championship in 1968, and the Wolverines lost 50-14. That's right. Despite the fact both teams were ranked in the top 5, the final score was a lopsided 50-14. In order to score 50 points, Ohio State put its starters back in the game for a 2-point conversion late in the fourth quarter. When asked afterwards why he went for 2 points to run up the score on his rival, the brash Ohio State coach said unapologetically, because I couldn't go for 3. Enter Bo Schembechler. Schembechler had been a Woody Hayes disciple, playing for Hayes and then serving as one of his top assistant coaches at Ohio State. Despite a successful tenure at Miami of Ohio, local media in Detroit asked the question, Bo who, when he was hired. The University of Michigan was the Haight-Ashbury of the Midwest in 1969, so it was a bit of a culture shock to see this conservative bull in a china shop with a crew cut arrive on campus. The first thing Schembechler did was purge his program of the soft-headed and uncommitted. That first spring practice was so tough that several players quit. Future NFL Hall of Famer Dan Deerdorf was on that team, and he told the media the track team runs less than us, and their coach is nicer. Schembechler was looking for players willing to do what it took to be great, not just pretty good. At a program that had been as successful as Michigan's, it's very easy for complacency to set in. Woody Hayes may have had a few faults, but complacency wasn't one of them. He was frankly hungrier than that school up north that he hated. Meanwhile, Michigan was content to rest on past laurels until Schembechler arrived. Come fall, Schembechler's first season initially got off to a bit of a rocky start, with a blowout loss at home to Missouri and a road loss to Michigan State. By the time the Wolverines hosted undefeated and top-ranked Ohio State, however, in the season finale in late November, they had gelled as a team and could clinch a Big Ten championship with an upset over the Buckeyes, who were 3-touchdown favorites. The talk all season after each Buckeye blowout is where that squad stood in the annals of college football. Analysts at the time said the only team that could beat Ohio State was the NFL's Minnesota Vikings and their famous Purple People Eaters. No one gave this ragtag bunch of Wolverines much of a chance. And why should they? They had lost by 36 points to these exact same Buckeyes 1 year ago. But by the end of that afternoon, Michigan pulled off what the pundits called the upset of the decade, beating Ohio State 24-12. Years later, when a now retired Woody Hayes reminisced at a banquet About the best team he ever had, the Hall of Fame coach said it was that 1969 team that was upset by Michigan. That win set the stage for a dominant era of Michigan football. 16 of the 21 teams Schembechler coached finished in the top 10 of the final rankings, and he won 13 Big Ten championships. Several coaches under his tutelage went on to have magnificent careers. Hall of Famers like Lloyd Carr and Don Nehlen. National champion coaches like Bill McCartney and Les Miles. Schembechler changed a complacent culture and rebuilt it on the pillars of integrity, accountability, and excellence. His leadership helped create other equally successful leaders who put their own spin on Schembechler's vision. I tell you all of this for two reasons. One, I might be the world's biggest Michigan fan and look for any opportunity to represent for the maize and blue, but you could care less about that. Two, because of all of this talk for our need to find another Ronald Reagan, I think what we really need are some Schembechlers. There is a fine line between tradition and nostalgia. Tradition is the assurance that you have the right ethics and institutions to be successful again based on what was done in the past, provided you have the right people in place to exploit them. Tradition spurs action and innovation to build upon a foundation of success. On the other hand, nostalgia is a paralyzing force because it tempts you to keep trying to recreate the precise conditions that led to a specific past success. Often that specific success was a moment in time, and the attempt to repeat it creates a myopic inflation of that success to the point it stalls progress towards a new era of success. Instead of moving forward, you keep trying to go back to the good old days. Right now, we are mired in nostalgia at the expense of our tradition. We are mired in nostalgia because our entire movement has been defined by one man's success, as opposed to the timeless traditions he fought for. As a result, every sort of Republican now claims Ronald Reagan as their legacy, even the absolute worst ones that might as well be Democrats. A pretty good rule of thumb is that if everybody can claim something, then nobody can. Yes, Reagan was a gifted man, and I've used several examples of that giftedness in this book, but that giftedness doesn't matter to us if it's not used to advance the principles we hold dear. There have been gifted people throughout history that used their gifts to do wicked and awful things. Why don't we celebrate them? Because what they stood for was wrong or evil. That's why. In other words, what they stood for overshadowed their giftedness. The same should be true of Reagan's positive legacy as well. While it's a testimony to his legacy that we still play clips of Reagan to defend our values today, it's also an indictment of how stale we are. At the time I was writing this book, I just turned 40 years old. When Reagan first ran for president in 1976, I was still eating paste in my boogers. When Reagan left the White House in 1989, I was in the 10th grade. The emerging generation of conservatives/libertarians behind me, they don't remember him at all. Al Gore had yet to invent the internet. Cell phones were a handheld monstrosity for the rich. There was no direct TV. We hadn't even invented those really cool frozen yogurt places where you buy in bulk depending on the amount of toppings you have. Heck, MTV was still playing music videos back then. You know how ancient the Macarena seems now? Well, when Reagan left office, the Macarena was still 8 years away from splitting our eardrums. And we still didn't know who let the dogs out either. The distance between 1989 and now is made even longer by how quickly information is transmitted with all our technology nowadays. When Reagan left office, we were just beginning the era of the 24-hour news cycle. Now we have the 24-minute news cycle if you take out the commercials, and 140 characters or less on Twitter. Quoting Reagan to the emerging generation today is like quoting Calvin Coolidge, another great conservative, mind you, but they don't remember him either. It's time to move forward. Now notice I didn't say move on, but move forward. Moving on either means forgetting the past or casting it aside. Moving forward means honoring it and then building on it. We don't need to return to the Reagan era any more than the Democrats need to return to the era of FDR. What we need to do is take the success Reagan had and build on it while at the same time learning from his failures. That's how you move forward. And yes, Reagan had failures. He wasn't a perfect angel that tiptoed through the raindrops without getting wet. That's nostalgia talking. Back to my beloved Michigan Wolverines for a second. After a phenomenal 40-year run, the university administration decided to move on from the Schembechler era rather than move forward. So they brought in Rich Rodriguez as head coach in 2008, and in the span of just 3 years, his tenure nearly dismantled 5 decades worth of a foundation that had been built. Rodriguez lost as many Big Ten games in his 3 seasons in Ann Arbor as Michigan had lost the previous 12 seasons combined. Rodriguez was eventually replaced by Brady Hoke, who was a part of the Schembechler era. Hoke returned Michigan to its Schembechler era pillars, but moved forward at the same time. He's not running the same offense and defense Schembechler was running in 1969. He's not prickly with the media the way Schembechler was early in his career, but instead realizes the necessity of being professional and available with the media, telling your story to future recruits. He runs a contemporary program built on the foundations of a timeless tradition. In his first season in 2011, he went 11-2, ended a 7-year losing streak to Ohio State, and notched Michigan's first major bowl victory in 12 years. Now that's what I call moving forward. The debate isn't about who is the next Reagan. The debate is about whether to move on or move forward from the Reagan era. Right now, the Republican Party on a national level is run by those who would rather move on. Sure, they use Reagan in their branding and fundraising, but they're far removed from the bold colors that he stood for. Their uniform is pale pastels. What I suggest we do is move forward. Reagan won 2 big arguments with the left: low taxes that spur economic growth, and peace through strength, focusing on the collapse of the Soviet Union via the arms race. Even Democrat presidents nowadays, when they're in trouble, offer targeted tax cuts and tax rebates as a means to spur economic development. So the debate is no longer about whether or not to cut taxes, but for whom and by how much. In addition, the era of the dovish Democrat president is over. President Clinton set a record for the most military deployments. President Obama may have talked a good George Soros game when running for president in 2008, but his foreign policy is virtually indistinguishable from his Republican predecessor, for better or for worse. And he's very proud to be the commander-in-chief that got Osama bin Laden. That's a far cry from the Democrats in the 1980s, feting communist Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega at Beltway cocktail parties. However, Reagan failed to substantially reduce the size of government, did nothing substantive to dismantle the left's monopoly on education, lent his name to a failed amnesty program that turned California from red to blue in elections for the last 2 decades, and appointed 2 mediocre to terrible Supreme Court justices. We don't need to keep having arguments we've already won. We need to start winning arguments we haven't yet had. It's time to stop pining away for the salad days and move forward and build on Reagan's legacy, not settle for it. The Reagan era was supposed to be the vanguard of a conservative renaissance, and instead it's become the high watermark. Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were instantly compared to Michael Jordan coming into the NBA. Both of them initially did little to temper those comparisons, and early on they each languished under the sheer weight of them. It wasn't until they became their own men. James had to move to another team to make that happen, and they developed their own games that both became repeat champions. If we truly want to honor Reagan's legacy, we must stop drowning in nostalgia awaiting his heir apparent, and instead rally around the principles he fought for. While we keep trying to turn the clock back, the left keeps moving forward. It's time for a new generation of leadership that combines a respect for tradition with a hatred for losing. And that means losing in the public policy arena and not just on election day. A new generation eager to prove themselves, like Schembechler was when he arrived at Michigan in 1969, willing to get rid of the dead weight and not accept good is good enough when only greatness will do. It is time for leaders that aren't here to make friends with the system, but have a cause they believe is worth fighting and dying for if necessary. Leaders who don't create followers that become groupies or hangers-on or lifelong political hacks, but instead inspire others to become disciples and leaders themselves and move on and take the fight elsewhere when they're ready to do so. We've got too many people that are comfortable with losing not as bad and calling that a win. We need leaders from the Ricky Bobby motivational school who understand second place is the first loser. And in our case, winning isn't simply winning an election, but winning the future for our children and grandchildren. We need a house cleaning and a culture change. We need to hit the Control-Alt-Delete buttons and reboot. You do that when your computer itself is still in good shape, but is locked up and not working the way it should. Similarly, our principles are still good, but the process of implementing them and advancing them has lockjaw. We have already discussed in this book how too often we accept the left's premise and allow them to have the moral high ground. So too often we end up being defined by what we're against, not what we're for. We also have failed to define what it is we're actually conserving as conservatives, which is an inherent weakness of our movement that 19th century theologian R.L. Dabney presciently observed. He said, quote, "Conservatism's history has been that it demurs to each aggression of the Progressive Party and aims to save its credit by a respectable amount of growling, but it always acquiesces at last to the innovation. What was the resisted novelty of yesterday is today one of the accepted principles of conservatism. It is now conservative only in affecting to resist the next innovation, which will tomorrow be forced upon its timidity and will be succeeded by some third revolution, to be denounced and then adopted in its turn. American conservatism is merely the shadow that follows radicalism as it moves forward through perdition. It remains behind it, but never retards it, and always advances near its leader." Every time I read that quote, it never fails to hit too close to home. As a Christian, I am commanded in the Bible to always have a ready defense for my faith, but nowhere am I commanded to remain perpetually on the defensive. The gospel itself is an offensive action, the result of a sovereign God who does not sit passively by, like a kid with an anthill, as his creation goes to pot, but instead actively engages his creation to the point of coming to earth himself to reach out to us flesh to flesh. The American Revolution was also an offensive action, with patriots taking action to preserve their God-given rights. I don't want to conserve the left's agenda by growing government less than they would, killing fewer children than they would, and destroying marriage incrementally through civil unions instead of outright handing over the institution of marriage like they would. I want to defeat the left, not conserve it. When it's time for my generation to leave the world stage, I want us to be known as the generation that did to America's leftist progressives what Reagan did to the Soviet Union. To make that happen, we need to play offense. Offense is essential because you have to be on offense to score points, and you have to score points to win. Playing offense also boosts your side's morale while doing psychological damage to the other side. Go back to the beginning of this chapter when I talked about how mentally beaten down we are. That's purely the result of the perception the left is always on the offensive and we're always on the defensive. That's why there's so much talk about returning to the Reagan era today, because other than the early days following the 1994 Republican takeover of Congress, that really was the only time any of us can remember our side on the offensive. I think that's also one of the reasons the late Andrew Breitbart made such an impact on the conservative movement despite passing away at only 43 years old, which is an age when most men are just starting to come into their own. Breitbart played offense and went after the left, and was equipping others to do the same. The left's confidence has morphed into hubris because they're used to playing offense, and we've conditioned them to anticipate our surrender any minute now. That's why we need our people to play offense, because it really does throw them into a hissy fit when we do. A good example of this was something Kentucky Senator Rand Paul did during the summer of 2012. Yes, that Rand Paul, the one who stepped in it earlier in this book, but this time he stepped on it, or rather, them. To do Rand justice, let's quote directly from the story the liberal Huffington Post did on the example I'm citing. Quote, "Senator Rand Paul moved this week to hold a non-controversial flood insurance bill hostage until the Senate agrees that life begins at fertilization. The bill, which would financially boost the national flood insurance program on the cusp of hurricane season, had been expected to pass easily in the Senate. But since Paul on Monday offered an unrelated fetal personhood amendment, which would give legal protections to fetuses from the moment of fertilization, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is threatening to halt progress on the legislation. I'm told last night that one of our Republican senators wants to offer an amendment, listen to this one, wants to offer an amendment on when life begins, Reid said on the Senate floor Tuesday. I'm not going to put up with that on flood insurance. I can be condemned by outside sources. My friends can say, let them have a vote on it. There will not be a vote on that on flood insurance. We'll either do flood insurance with the amendments that deal with flood insurance, or we won't do it. We'll have an extension. Reid has previously allowed Republicans to attach unrelated amendments to other important bills in the past few months, but Reid called Paul's measure ridiculous and outlandish and asked Republicans to deal with him on their side of the aisle. Now, that's the kind of leadership I'm talking about. Rand Paul played offense by attaching personhood, the ultimate pro-life principle in action, onto a bill that was expected to pass easily. By doing so, he would either force the Democrats to give him his vote on it or cause them to make total fools out of themselves, as Reid does in this article. like when Reed expresses incredulity that we could actually debate something as trite and insignificant in the U.S. Senate as when life begins. Given that life is one of the inalienable rights to life posited in our founding document, is there anything more important for our elected officials to be debating? I've put that part of the Huffington Post story and a few other lines in bold in the book for a reason, because they're examples of how Rand Paul, by playing offense, grabbed the moral high ground and was making the left accept our premise. Note the article doesn't refer to Rand's pro-life bill as anti-reproductive freedom, but as personhood. If they're going to report accurately on the bill, even the liberal Huffington Post has to use that term because personhood isn't having an argument with anti-lifers about how many kids we're going to permit them to kill, or how we'll let them kill them, or when we'll let them kill them, after they jump through a few hoops. Maybe then they can kill the baby. No, personhood is a debate about whether or not all life is precious and sacred. Personhood is the high ground. Furthermore, Rand Paul got the Democrat Senate Majority Leader to call debating when life begins ridiculous and outlandish. Remember the 2008 presidential forum hosted at Saddleback Church when Rick Warren asked Barack Obama, at what point does an unborn baby deserve human rights? Remember Obama's flippant, that's above my pay grade response? Remember that was one of the few times you actually thought John McCain could win the election? That's because it was about the only time in the entire campaign that McCain grabbed the moral high ground and played offense, with a considerable assist from Warren's question, of course. Rand Paul managed to do something here few pro-life politicians have successfully been able to do for years: get the left off script and reacting to our argument. Reed is so frustrated with what Rand Paul did here, he insisted Republicans deal with him on their side of the aisle. If a committed pro-life Republican wanted to challenge Reed in his next election, they've got one whale of a soundbite to use against him now. The Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, and everywhere else for that matter, should be constantly emulating what Rand Paul did here. The real question is how come Rand Paul in his second year in the U.S. Senate managed to get under Reed's skin in a way most of the Republicans who have been up there for eons haven't. Rand did something else by doing this as well. He boosted team morale. Now maybe it's a coincidence that Rand did this just 2 weeks after his endorsement of establishment proxy Mitt Romney drew the ire of many of his own supporters. But before we become too cynical, we should note the first bill Rand Paul ever sponsored as a U.S. Senator was a personhood bill. So while the timing may not be a coincidence, it's clear this is a principle that Rand cares deeply about. By playing offense with his principles, Rand changed the conversation from his lackluster endorsement to his bold leadership. He didn't undo all the damage he did to his base with this one gesture, but he took a giant first step towards doing so. Not to be outdone, Senator Ted Cruz has produced a highlight reel of similar moments early in his first term as a U.S. Senator. As a result, there is more excitement for Cruz among the grassroots than any Republican politician I can remember. And it's because he's seen as someone they can play offense with, whether it's a confirmation hearing, taking the fight to the left, or confronting Republicans like John McCain on the floor of the U.S. Senate. As one mainstream media reporter told me off the record, quote, Cruz is a different animal. You ask a lot of these other Republicans a question that requires an answer other than their talking points, and they stall or look to change the subject. But Cruz comes right after the question, turns it around on the questioner if he doesn't like it, and then always has an answer ready to go if he does. This is why I told National Review last year that Cruz isn't just a potential GOP 2016 presidential candidate. He's a potential force of nature. I'm too young to remember the ascendancy of Reagan, but in my lifetime, nobody has better articulated the principles of the conservative grassroots on a national level than Cruz. Throw in his family's powerful testimony as first-generation immigrants escaping tyranny, and he has the total package it takes to take on the ruling class. Leadership always wins, and people love a winner. Remember the mantra of the Republicrats: surrender now before it's too late. The GOP and sadly many conservatives are punch-drunk, believing on one hand the majority of the country is with us, while at the same time walking around with the proverbial sword of Damocles dangling over our heads. Conservatives long for a day when America suddenly wakes up and returns to our constitutional Republican roots. But it's hard to do that when conservatives rarely attempt to advance their principles beyond their own enclaves and subcultures. Wacko birds like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Mike Lee of Utah aren't waiting until there's a Republican majority to push their moral convictions, or waiting for any other harmonic convergence which never occurs that the Republicans say we must have before we actually play offense with our principles. They're acting instead as someone that believes they're accountable to conscience, convictions, and constituents, not the corrupt process or some phony definition of Senate collegiality. During parts of campaign 2012, I was a frequent guest on MSNBC, and just about every time I announced I was going on, a fellow conservative would either email or tweet me that I should never go on that channel because of its leftist leanings. Yet on MSNBC, I've had the opportunity to take some of the most hard-right positions you'll ever see anywhere on national television, and I've even shared my Christian testimony. In fact, I once received the following email from Jonathan Collegio, who is the communications director for Karl Rove's American Crossroads. He wrote, quote, "I've been meaning to reach out for a while, not regarding the Conservatives versus Rhodes sideshow, but because I wanted to thank you for giving some of the best, most fearless, and most succinct remarks on the gospel I've heard on TV ever. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember it was on MSNBC, and I suddenly looked up from my desk and saw you basically preaching the good news about Jesus." As the host and the other guests just kind of stood there stunned. It was likely the most gospel-centered message ever given on MSNBC, and I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated it. God has blessed you with great communication skills, and it encouraged me to see you be so boldly talking about Jesus, especially in the face of an audience like that. Last I checked, if you want to govern, you have to win a majority of the hearts and minds of the voters. To win a majority of those hearts and minds at some point means you are going to have to venture into foreign territory with the courage to engage them. That's how we generate converts. St. Paul changed entire cultures with nothing more than the Word of God and a tent-making kit, and he did so under the constant threat of death. The only threat we're under is being mocked or rejected. Sure, after I go on MSNBC, I often get called every nasty name in the book by the tolerance mob, but I've also received several emails from folks who said that because of my willingness to be honest in my analysis and holding Republicans to the same standard as Democrats, and how respectful I was when making my arguments, they're willing to consider what I'm saying, when previously they just dismissed it out of hand. I even had a producer at MSNBC tell me once, "I used to think people like you were crazy, and I'm still not sure I agree with anything you say, but you actually have facts and figures to back up why you believe what you believe. So at the very least, I've come around to understanding how someone could think the way that you do." When Bobby Bowden took over as football coach at Florida State, he scheduled road games at places like Nebraska and Michigan to get his team featured on national television. The Seminoles weren't the college football power back then they eventually became, so Bowden had to accept one-game contracts with no return game in Tallahassee. Still, Bowden decided the exposure for the Florida State brand was worth the risk. That plan eventually paid off. The Seminoles increased exposure to their brand and were able to recruit better players as a result. Those players eventually helped them win some of those road games, and Florida State eventually set a record by finishing in the top 5 of the final AP college football poll, a record 14 consecutive seasons. Bowden eventually surpassed his legendary idol Bear Bryant in all-time wins as well. We have the truth and tradition on our side, meaning that human history proves our principles are true. Every society that has embraced the ideology of the left has been cursed, and every society that has embraced our ideology has been blessed. It's no coincidence that the more we lurch to the left, the worse off the average American becomes. We should be as confident as Breitbart and Bowden in taking our beliefs and brand out into the culture at large and playing offense with them. It's not only to score points and reach the unconverted, but it also keeps up the morale of our own troops and rallies our base. In the 2010 midterm elections, we had a great goal line stand that stopped the left from shoving Obamacare and cap and tax down our throats, which would have been the game-clinching touchdowns for the progressives. However, any knowledgeable football fan knows that when your offense gets the ball back after a goal line stand, you're on your own 1-yard line with 99 yards to go for you to score a touchdown. Fellow Patriot, I believe that is an accurate picture of where we currently stand. We need to start playing offense and putting the leftists on the defensive. Obviously, 99-yard touchdown plays are rare, but at the very least, we need leaders and arguments that give us some first downs so we can improve our field position. First downs build momentum and get your crowd back in the game. String together enough first downs, and before you know it, you're in position to score a touchdown. And we need touchdowns, not settling for field goals. We are facing, at best, a long generational grind to restore the republic. And the longer we take to go on offense, the longer it will take to preserve freedom and liberty for our children and grandchildren. Take too long, and we'll be out of time altogether.
And that was Chapter 11 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative of the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that determinism is a choice.